got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. There's not a lot of time left for 2025, but we do have enough time for a best of books with my favorite book critic in America, the best read lady in the United States, if not in the world, Bethanne Patrick, the book critic of the Los Angeles Times and a living legend online, a frequent guest on our show. We're doing a best of. I asked her to choose 8 books, 8 nonfiction, 8 fiction, but 4 nonfiction, 4 fiction. But one of the themes, I think, of our conversation will be the blurring of the distinction between fiction and nonfiction. One of the books, actually, that Bethanne chose, we already dealt with in our June show, which was entitled, We Get the Serial Killers and Heroes We Deserve. It's a nonfiction book. It's called Murderland, Crime and Bloodlust in the Time of Serial Killers, but it very much reads as fiction. It's by Caroline Fraser. Bethanne, what's so great about Murderland?
Murderland is a very interesting examination of a time in the 1970s when there were a lot of serial killers on the loose in the United States, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. And, we can think, of course, of one of the most famous, Ted Bundy. We can also think of another famous, unfortunately, one, Charles Manson. And what's interesting about Murderland is that Fraser goes into not just the geography, topography, anthropology of the places, but she also dives deep into something she thinks caused the spate of serial killings, and that's toxins in the air people were breathing. And this is very specific, and there is some evidence for this. This is not something she's making up out of whole cloth. There was a lot of airborne lead coming out of mining and smelting concerns, in particular, places that were known to be funded by Guggenheim money. And so I'm talking about mining and smelting concerns that are based on the Asarco sites that happened.
So there's a kind of Saka quality, so to speak.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that readers like me will remember is, why did the Mad Hatter go crazy in Alice in Wonderland? Because of the lead used in hat blocking techniques in the 19th century. Lead is known to effect real behavioral changes in people who have too high a level of it in their blood. So you can believe Fraser or not. You can read the book and weigh this for yourself. However, what Murderland does is bring the atmosphere and the tension of a time when many, many men and women were fearful for their lives. And many young women had families, parents who, didn't want to let them out because they were afraid of serial killers. So it's a really atmospheric book. It's a very readable book, and it brings up some big questions about big mining in the United States.
And it also, given our current obsession with so-called real crime,
yes,
it speaks of this very thin layered distinction between real crime and fictional crime.
Yes, because people think, they love to read true crime. They, some of us believe
as if there's something called, Bethanne, untrue crime.
Right, exactly. And many people will trace that back to Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, of course. And many people say reading true crime, is so educational, so enlightening, but Frasier shows that some of it is just plain awful. It's awful to read about this. It's awful to think about people having so much toxicity in the air that we breathe because of pollutants, that their minds are being affected. That's frightening. I am not in any way being an apologist for serial killers. What I am saying, however, is that I think Frasier does a great job of twining together, as you said, Andrew, what really happened and the way it kind of blows up in our minds. And we still, watch murder shows, as we call them, and true crime shows. And what's the one, Mindhunter? That's about, an FBI agent, trying to learn more about the psychology of a serial killer. It's a great book for people who do read crime and watch crime and who want to know a little bit more about what's in the very atmosphere. I think that's the third time I've used the word atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of apocalyptic quality to this in an environmental sense. And switching over to one of your favorite novels of the year, McEwan, Ian McEwan's What We Can Know. Everyone, of course, has read something by McEwan. Now I think he's in his 80s, perhaps.
He's 77. And
77, well.
77, and this is one of his best books in years.
But there's a kind of a apocalyptic, in a sense, quality to this narrative. I heard him on David Runciman's excellent podcast, Past, Present, Future, talking about the book. And whilst one would expect Apocalypse Now or Apocalypse Future from Ian McEwan, it's actually moderately optimistic, isn't it, the book?
Well, yes and no. It is moderately optimistic. It starts out in a dystopian sci-fi kind of way. You have Tom Metcalf, who is a scholar, a literary scholar, and he's gone to everything has been transformed by water, by flooding, by high rising sea levels. And so he's gone to the Bodleian Library in Snowdonia. It's open. They've opened the Bodleian on the highest peak in Wales so that, it's not underwater. And he's trying to track down a specific long poem that was written in the 2010s. It's 21 something in the novel. So it is a little dystopian, but then the second half of the novel goes back to those 2010 scenes when the poem was written. And so it's very much realistic fiction. And only McEwan, I swear, could put a book together like this in two such different halves, and yet make us realize that this isn't about the world ending. It's about what human beings do with whatever we have at any given point in time. And that is, I think, where the hope comes from, because, when you are in the present, and going back to the podcast you just mentioned with the word present in its title, when you're in the present, there's no way for you to know what it was like in 2013. There's no way for us to know what it's going to be like in 2125. And the combination I found really addicting. I found it to be something that made me think. One reviewer said something about the fact that the only problem with this book is I don't know if I actually am smart enough to understand everything McEwan's trying to do. And that, I think, is probably the only thing wrong with this book. It is so rich with
Well, the only thing wrong then is what we bring. The New York Times loved it, talking about a scholarly quest amidst the ruins of civilization. In a sense, McEwan leaves civilization. Another of your novels is literally about leaving civilization.
Yes, it is.
Stoneyard Devotional by an Australian writer, Charlotte Wood. Again, the blurring of fiction and or nonfiction and fantasy. We can all imagine leaving this world, given all its problems.
Well, this one takes place in the actual world. We're in Australia, And the narrator, who is in her 60s, has decided to leave her long marriage and live permanently in a convent of contemplative nuns. Very small convent, not a whole lot of nuns, but they do have a lot of ties to the outside world. And this is where the going gets interesting, because at first, this narrator, who not only is leaving behind her marriage and family, but also is an atheist. Okay. We're not talking about a devout Roman Catholic going to live in a convent. This is someone who doesn't believe in religion at all. And she spends her first, I don't know, days, weeks there, just lying on the floor doing nothing. But sooner or later, she realizes, my goodness, these sisters, they're busy all the time. And she becomes busy as well. Into all of this comes a corpse, a famous nun activist, and a plague of mice. And I don't know how to explain how interesting this makes this book. It sounds so odd, but it is really a book about beating back despair as humans. And so I highly recommend it. It was on
and it comes back, coming back to the McEwen book,
Yep.
which is in a way about human agency and how we can improve the world. I guess this book, Stoneyard Devotional, is also about agency.
It is. It's this book is, oh, sorry about that. Sorry about going off camera for a second, turning off my fan. And it is about a different way of life. And it is about what happens when you leave everything behind. In this case, it's voluntary. In the case of the McEwen novel, the people in the 2100s, it is involuntary, but there are things to learn from each scenario.
And speaking, Bethanne, of leaving everything behind, another of your books, nonfiction this time, a true story of love, obsession, and shipwreck, a marriage at sea, which two people really did leave everything behind.
They did. And I'm wild about this book this year. And it has been on quite a few other best of lists. I won't be surprised to hear about, the adaptation. It's the craziest story. Maurice and Marilyn Bailey were English people who decided they got involved in sailing. They liked adventure. They liked hiking. They liked backpacking. They did a lot of boating together. He was 8 years older than she was. And in the early 1970s, when she was about 32 years old, they decided they were going to go on a sailing voyage to New Zealand. And not only were they going to be sailing, no, great motor, to take them along, but they didn't even have a radio because Maurice decided it would be better to just do everything the old-fashioned way.
You're very much Stoneyard Devotional.
Yes, very much.
Treating the sea as if it's a monastery or a nunnery.
That's right. That's right. He did treat the sea as if it were some kind of monastery. And this is what you'll see. So what happens is they've gotten so far, and I'm not recalling exactly where this happened right now, but they're on their way when a 40-foot whale, who had probably been injured by some kind of fishing boat, capsized their small sailing boat. And so they were left with a dinghy and an inflatable life raft. That was all they had. And 118 days later, they were rescued by a South Korean fishing vessel. But the story, and here's what's amazing about this book, Andrew, it's been told. Okay, their story was told. They wrote a memoir, or Marilyn did, I believe. They were feted all over the globe. I believe there was a documentary made about their trip, but then people forgot all about it. Elmhurst not only has picked up this story, but she's fleshed it out and made it really human. So Marilyn's version was kind of cut and dried, and then we.
Speaking of a voyage at sea, cut and dried, I couldn't excuse that one. I couldn't resist that one.
That's
Sorry.
right. When you read this, you'll think, what do I want to read about a shipwreck for? It just sounds so terrible, but it's absolutely fascinating. And when you see how resourceful Marilyn is, Maurice, or Morris, he may have said, is very depressive. Morris is constantly thinking about double suicide. He's constantly saying, let's give up.
The ideal partner for a long sea trip, right?
Yeah, right.
On a
Not
boat.
the ideal partner at all.
I'm joking. Yeah,
I know,
not
no,
the
I
kind of
know you
person
are.
you want to
But
be
I mean,
stuck with on a tiny boat sailing to New Zealand.
just terrible. Can you imagine? Meanwhile, she is figuring out how they can eat congealed turtle blood and raw sea turtle and booby flesh. She figures out how they can capture flying fish that leap onto the boat. She is designing dresses in her little notebook. She even made a deck of playing cards out of some little pieces of paper.
Did she cheer him up?
She did. She cheered him up. I don't know if she cheered him up to her level, but she got him through. And
I hope she charged him as a therapist. The subtitle of the book, Bethanne, is A True Story of Love, Deception, and Shipwreck. I'm always whenever anyone, a true story of love, obsession, not deception, and shipwreck. That was a Freudian error. I wonder. Whenever I see the subtitle A True Story, it always occurs to me it's why people would say that, and often it's made up. There was a story of a couple, another English couple who went walking in England, and I can't remember what was the name of
Salt Path,
and then it was found that half of it was made up, or they weren't telling their true story. Is this really a true story?
This is really a true story, and this is a documented true story. It's documented not only in all of the painstaking notes and diaries that Marilyn kept, but also on film and in interviews and with evidence from their two little craft that they wound up in. So there was a great deal. This is not made up, but it is harrowing. And here's the most harrowing part to me: they make it through, and as we said, Morris is not.
Well, they would have to.
They would have to, but
tell the story.
They went on another sea voyage.
Oh my God.
They actually, and the funniest part of that to me, if it can be said to be funny, is that the people they went on that voyage with found them so annoying, they considered throwing them overboard, in a cheeky way. But I imagine that Marilyn and Morris were not the most fun.
Well, she sounds in a way maybe as equally as annoying as him. She's positive and innovative to an extreme, and he's reclusive and miserable to an extreme. They probably deserve each other.
It's true, but it's great reading. I can't.
Yeah, it sounds like a great book. I haven't read it. And of course, again, it's this blurring of what we know about the world and what we don't know, and whether the world is knowable. And another of your novels by Katie Kitamura, Audition, is literally about this. How can we trust the world, and how, as we readers, can trust the book? Tell me about this book. Is it a trustworthy book? Can we trust Katie Kitamura?
Oh, yes, we can. And let me tell you, here's one of the reasons you can trust her. This is a very spare book. And let's contrast it for a moment with the McEwan, which is full of details, especially when he gets back to the 2010s. And
yeah, well, it's classic McEwan. It's
exactly. Kitamura is all about taking away anything that doesn't need to be there. And so reading this book, which is about a stage actor and her family, the experience of reading it feels like the experience of an audition for the lively arts. So anyone who's ever auditioned for a role on the stage, in a theater production, in a musical, for an orchestra, etc., will know that feeling of balancing on the edge of something very sharp. And it is a very sharp book. It is also in two halves, like McEwan.
Yeah, but it's I mean, the New York Times asks about the book, or about one of the characters in the book. Is he a stranger, her son, her lover, or all three? In other words, we're not quite sure.
No, we're not quite sure. We do essentially find out what's going on in the
Well, don't
second
give away
half,
the end.
but no spoilers. We don't it's not precisely a conclusion, it's an alternate version, and that's not a spoiler either. But there is a lot that's not said, there's a lot that's allowed to be assumed, there is a lot that each character has to learn about the other characters. And when I say characters, there's the woman, the actor, there is this much younger man, and then in the second half, there is also her longtime husband. And what his relationship is to this young man becomes part of the second half of the book. So it's a multi-layered performance piece. Who's being auditioned? At first, it seems like it must be this young man. This woman is auditioning him for a role, or she's auditioning him to find out if he really is her son. But bit by bit, it becomes much less about the static identities of these three people, and much more. It becomes almost Pinteresque, almost a Harold Pinter sort
Yeah, I
of
mean,
thing.
there's a detective quality about it. And of course,
Yeah.
all good books introduce and reintroduce us to stuff that people, themes, histories that we already thought we knew, but
Yes.
we don't. Bring
Yes.
new information, new way of thinking. Another of your nonfiction choices, Baldwin, about the great African-American writer, thinker, political writer, James Baldwin, emphasizes Baldwin's romantic side. I wanted to actually interview the author of this book, and I'm going to get him, Nicholas Boggs, on the
Good.
show at some point. What
Excellent.
does Boggs bring to Baldwin that we didn't already know? I mean, he's one of America's best-known cultural figures of the second part of the 20th century.
Well, one of the things I think Boggs does so well is define Baldwin by his four great loves. Now, we've got four different men involved. And of course, Lucien Happersberger was the one that Baldwin says was the great love of his life. But we've got, Delaney, Happersberger, Cesar, and Kazak. And in Boggs's eyes,
These are all love interests.
these are all love interests.
James
Each
Baldwin.
of these men, who were all from different countries and cultures, nurtured a different side of Baldwin. Baldwin the artist, Baldwin the activist, Baldwin the creative, and so on.
Baldwin the son.
Baldwin, that's right, Baldwin the son. And one of the things about Baldwin, I think, that is so important is he brought both race and sexual orientation into places where it had never been discussed before, because of his fame, because of his love of the limelight and his comfort in that limelight, and also because of his activism. He got in front of people who never would have uttered, the word homosexuality or the word, African American before. And he said, he really wanted, one of the things Baldwin wanted was to get quote unquote white Americans, or as he said, people who think they are white, to stop posing, to really understand that they have to learn to love, and in learning to love, give up this notion of whiteness. And so there's a lot in James Baldwin that we still haven't reckoned with. And I was very surprised, Andrew, not to see this book on more.
Well, it was on a lot of the lists. A Time top 10 book, an Atlantic top 10 book, a New York
but
Times.
not as many as I thought. It was really interesting looking.
Well, talking about whiteness, I take his point on convincing white people that they're not about whiteness. Did he think of himself in terms of blackness? How did he self-identify?
That I think is such a great question, because I think, and not being a person of color myself, I don't know if I could answer that
Well, but what's the book? I'm not asking you.
No, no,
What's
no,
the
no.
book
I know
say?
that. I know that. But I don't even think Boggs would take that on. But I think
But can
from
he have it
reading,
both ways? Can he
I'm gonna,
criticize
yes,
what?
yeah. Give me a second here.
All right, go on.
What I'm trying to say is, I think Boggs would tell you that Baldwin saw no choice other than to see himself as Black because of the culture, because of the prevailing culture. And one of the things about being in other countries for him, spending so much time in France, for example, was the freedom from the American problems of race, having a completely different way of thinking. And that is where he might not have thought of himself as Black when he was actually in, St. Paul de Vence, for example.
Okay, so I take your point. So what you're saying is that in leaving America, Baldwin was also able to escape his Blackness, so to speak.
Yes. Yes, he escaped the Blackness that society put on him, as opposed to his own sense of being a Black man. Of course, he was extremely proud of being Black. He never he wasn't going to try to pass, and he wasn't going to try to, write.
Well, it would be difficult for James Baldwin to
No,
pass.
I know that, but still. But what I mean is, he was such an ardent activist for race relations and civil rights. So, I think it's true that
In terms of his intellectual legacy, I mean, Baldwin's remembered for many things.
Yeah.
What is this? I know that this was a book about his private life and his romantic life, but how are we left in terms of Baldwin's greatness as a writer?
I think we're left with a lot of questions, because Boggs makes sure that readers understand not everyone thinks of Baldwin as a magnificent writer. But for me, and I think for Boggs as well, Baldwin will always be an incredible writer because he was an incredible thinker. Was he the same kind of stylist that another one of his contemporaries was? Probably not, because he had other concerns. He was all about substance, and he didn't ignore style. He craved creativity and beauty and all of that sort of thing. But many of the ideas that he needed to write about urgently needed to be written about as plainly as possible. I'm thinking, for example, of If Beale Street Could Talk, which is just the most beautiful evocation of a time and place. And it doesn't do literary pyrotechnics. It does realism. James Baldwin, did a lot of thinking, and it shows in his, I think, really beautiful prose.
Baldwin, of course, is on the right side of history. Another character who is covered in a novel, but based on a true person, The Director by Daniel Kellman, is on the wrong side of history. G.W. Pabst, the Austrian filmmaker who worked under the Nazis. There's an odd symmetry or dissymmetry between Baldwin, the book Baldwin, and The Director, isn't there?
Well,
Bethanne.
What I was talking about with James Baldwin fleeing the American notions of what it means to be Black, the American notions of African American-ness, if you will, that's all about performing, isn't it? And The Director is all about performance under the Nazi regime during World War II. And it is, as you said, about G.W. Pabst, who was a real life filmmaker. He was Austrian, and he and his family were, if you will, caught under the Nazi regime after the Anschluss. And Pabst continues to be a filmmaker, and eventually, if you want to call it a soft collaboration, I don't really think of it as soft, but he collaborates with Goebbels, the head of propaganda, And I think this should have a lot of readers thinking about their own professional pursuits and how intertwined those pursuits are with dictatorial agendas. And just to a little side note, the German title of the director is Lichtspiel, or light play, which is, of course, one term used for movies or filmmaking.
So why did Kelman choose to write a novel rather than a biography?
Well, I think because Kelman wanted to tease things out and make more of them than he would have been able to do with just the facts about Pops. There's some, and there's certainly some good information about his work, but there isn't a lot about Pops out there himself. There isn't a lot of interiority. And, if you will, the director has all of these different kinds of scenes. For instance, you could think of the first chapter as almost a cold open, because you're just flung in medias res in this scene where a very old man is being interviewed on a late night show, and he's clearly in the throes of dementia and clearly is going to have a meltdown, and he does. But it leads us to the fact that there were these filmmakers who worked for the Nazis. And eventually, and this is something that really, it's incredible to read, but it's also very chilling. There is an account that Kelman, expands about a movie Pabst made with a fake Alpine background, and it has a star turn from none other than future Nazi filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl. But it is so made up and so artificial, and Kelman writes it so carefully that it gave me sort of a chill thinking of Wes Anderson movies and their artificiality and their looks at, mountainous Europe and Mitteleuropa. It was really, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to call Wes Anderson a Nazi, but it was really
I think Wes Anderson could do with a dose of Nazism. He's the most boring filmmaker in the world. But that's another subject, another show. Well, comparing Baldwin, you noted that maybe in terms of his intellectual achievements, his focus was on simplicity because the world around him was so interesting. Right. Does Kelman deal with Pabst's talent, his creativity? I mean, he was a great filmmaker in Weimar Germany. It doesn't make him a great man, especially in his association with the Nazis. But does he investigate the connection between talent and morality? I mean, there's so many stories of incredibly talented people under the Nazis who, for one reason or other, supported them or turned a blind eye. Heidegger comes to mind, of course.
Exactly. Well, what he's really looking at is not, whether a person has great talent and then uses it, but Kelman is more interested in whether any person chooses to use what they have for the good of a regime like the Nazis. That's what he's really interested in. This is great because this is, cinematic, this is filmmaking, this is drama, but it could be a butcher, it could be an engineer, it just happens. This makes a better story. And I think that is one of the points about what these films
So what are we left with about the director in terms of, I'm sure they're thinking it would be appropriate to turn the novel into a movie, given it's about movie making. Absolutely. What are we left with about Pabst? Do we admire him more or less? Not at all. Having read the book?
No, not at all. We do not admire him. We are not. We may have some initial sympathy when his family, that fairly well-to-do family, winds up with their household staff who are already firm adherents to the Nazi creed, when the household staff turns on them. But by the end of the book, we've seen that he has made his own bed. He has made his choices. And, at any time he could have said no. He could have said, I'm going to do something else. And yes, we all know that doing something else might involve something terrifying. It might involve imprisonment, arrest, torture, threats to family. But at the same time, this is, the slippery slope. And so, we don't come out with a good view of Pabst at all.
And of course, there's a contemporary relevance here, given how fashionable, amongst some people at least, the Nazis seem to be. I did a show a few days ago with George Packer, who's written The Emergency, and we discussed similarity in some ways between Stephen Miller and Goebbels. You mentioned Goebbels in The Director as the Nazi minister of propaganda. So probably Daniel Kellman wrote this book with one eye on the present, as all great novelists do. Finally, we've talked a lot about people. We haven't talked about things. And your final book is about a thing. I mean, it's about people as well, but it's about a church. Mother Emanuel, a nonfiction book by Kevin Sachs, 2 centuries of race, resistance, and forgiveness in one Charleston church. It's about the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, right?
Yes. And this is, the oldest African-American congregation in the United States. So this is a really important congregation historically, as well as community-wise. And of course, 10 years ago, a man named Dylan Roof, who, titled himself a white supremacist, entered the church, was greeted, sat down, and then emptied, an automatic rifle.
Yeah, it turned it into, borrowing the language of another of your books, turned it into Murderland.
Turned it into Murderland, exactly. And what's really sad, ultimately, is to know that today, 10 years later, the doors of the church aren't always open the way they once were. And some of the congregants now carry concealed weapons. So it's not a triumphal story, but it is a story of forgiveness. And one of the things that SAC does with the interviews with people who are members of the parish and the church is to look into how they have forgiven what happened. And it is a really terrible, terrible thing, but they're more interested in moving on, and they're more interested in having Mother Emanuel continue than they are in having it become something that is simply an emblem of hate in the United States. They've endured, more than 2 centuries now, and so they want to continue on.
So it's a book about resilience in a way.
It is.
The resilience of a building, the resilience of an idea, the resilience of a community.
Yeah, and it's a really beautiful one. It's very, very special, and a lot of people don't know that Charleston was actually, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries, an incredible place of diversity. It's where the first synagogue was in the United States, this first African-American congregation. There was a lot of religious freedom and freedom of thought and liberalism in the air in Charleston. Nowadays, we think about spring break trips and antique shops and, lovely, Southern ways. But Charleston was once a pretty interesting place. And I think Mother Emanuel is continuing that tradition of.
Although it was also the center of the slave industry, the home of the Ball family, who were the biggest owners of slaves in pre-independence United States. So it has a complex history too.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of sad history as well involved in Charleston.
So in a way, maybe we can connect McEwen's What We Can Know About the Resilience of the Human Spirit with Sachs's Mother Emanuel, the resilience of a community and of a church.
I think so. And we can also connect it to Baldwin, because James Baldwin was nothing if not resilient, nothing if not someone who kept going. You know, there are things that could connect all of these books if we wanted to go that far, and we might not want to. But I have to say, I cannot get these 8 books out of my head this year. And there are others that I loved, and I know there are others you've
Yeah, well,
read.
I'm going to be a bit cheeky and throw in one of my own,
Please.
which is a book that, again, straddles fiction and nonfiction. It's by Leah Upi.
Oh, I love Leah's books. Oh my gosh, I just am reading this new one.
Yeah, Indignity, and which is a book in a way about her grandmother, but it's also a book about the Balkans. And whilst it's supposed to be true, it reads like fiction.
Her first one, Free, about growing up under Uncle Enver Hoxha.
Yeah, in Albania.
In Albania, was one of my favorite memoirs.
So what do you think of Indignity? Have you studied it already?
I am, and I am really into it, but it's very different. It's so different because it's not her own experience. And
yeah, but doesn't it have a kind of a magical realist quality in the way she writes?
I think she does. And there's, oh gosh, I'm thinking of another young woman writer who writes about the Balkans and had a novel. Oh my gosh.
Rebecca West?
No,
it's someone contemporary.
Someone contemporary. It's the tigers, the tiger. There's a central tiger figure, a sort of mythical, real. But anyway, I think there's some very interesting writing.
And I borrowed a line from Bob Dylan: "Dignity has never been photographed," to describe this book, Indignity. So I particularly enjoyed it because it's about a life reimagined, but there is, if not a fictional quality, certainly a speculative quality. Yes. I'm going to come to your favorite book of the year. I always nail you on this one. Probably an unfair question, Bethanne. But before we get there, what kind of year has it been for you and for the book industry? You continue to do your excellent work for the LA Times. A couple of years ago, you had your own memoir, Life Be, about your own depression. Have you had a good year, and has it been a good year for the book business?
Let me put those separately and then see what I can put together. I've had an amazing year, a completely unexpected year in which my husband decided to retire a bit early, and we have moved from one state to another to a completely new house and new community, and that's all good. And one of our daughters had a wedding, and that was also
congratulations.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Thank you. It was really joyous. So that's my life. The book industry is having a really tough time. And part of the really tough time it's having, for instance, I just saw a story yesterday or today about the units sold of the Olivia Nuzzi book, and it's just not selling the way.
But I can't say I feel particularly sorry either for her or her publisher.
No, but here's the thing. Feel sorry not for Olivia Nuzzi.
I'm sure she got a very, very juicy advance on that.
Exactly, but maybe for the booksellers, it's just not flying off the shelves the way a book often does. And I think the idea of reading as a leisure activity, let alone as an intellectual activity, is falling on hard times right now. And Andrew, one thing I'll say,
I mean, that's been a narrative for
but
the last quarter century at least.
But it's really gone kind of viral, if you will, this year. There's a lot more information, a lot more data about how few people are reading, how few young people are reading. And, as someone, a longtime colleague once told me, and this is some years ago, as you said, this has been going on for a while. Oh gosh, I love to read and I thought I'd be reading, but there's so much good TV. So
not just TV, but social media, of course.
Social media, etc., influencers.
Well, what about AI? was talking to an academic, a professor at UC Berkeley a few weeks ago, who said to me that he had a young woman who came to him and said, he, of course, bans the use of AI in class and with his students. And the young woman came to him and told him that she objected because she just didn't want to read, and that she found that you could use technology that would summarize a book very quickly in a few seconds compared to the week it would take you to read a book. And whilst on the one hand, of course, one can be sympathetic to the professor and to book culture and all the rest of it, she does have a point in the sense that just as now we don't walk across the country, we take a train or a plane or a car. If we have technology that allows us to summarize a book so quickly, doesn't that mean, Bethanne, that the value of books changes and the books with information on them have much less value than they did in a pre-AI age, but performative books, books that can't just be summarized, that can be quantified, actually have more value?
I agree with you. I don't have data on that, so I can't necessarily, don't quote me on it. But what I will say is that I understand when students want to use AI, and especially when we all want to use AI for things like summarizing meeting notes or building a spreadsheet. I understand also that books, like the example of travel that you were giving, why would we take a horse and buggy when we can take a train or an airplane? Technology changes, but once upon a time, no one knew how to read. Once upon a time, if you bought a novel, you had to spend at least an hour cutting the pages, apart so you could leaf through it. There are all kinds of changes all the time to the matter that we consume. However, there are things we know about reading in long form. There are things we know about reading to children. There are things we know about the power of stories that don't go away. And that's what, I think worries me about AI, is AI destroying the importance of stories to human beings, because it's such a fundamental thing. We've been building our stories for millions of years now. And I don't want AI to take that away, for people to think that, oh, well, I can just have a story by putting on a virtual reality headset and entering a room and having it all spin around.
That's the beauty, I think, of the 8 books you've selected, and all good books, and including particularly, I would guess, Leah Upi's Indignity, is you could feed any of your 8 books into AI and they'd come out with a summary, but it wouldn't tell you any more about the book. You wouldn't experience the book anymore, because good books, great books, the 8 you selected, the Leah Upi book, are more than just information.
They're experiential, and you change while you're reading them. One thing I have never done, and this is the product of, not owning a lot of books as a young person. I don't make a lot of marginalia in my books, because I was always afraid of ruining them, and I didn't have, very many on my shelf. Of course, I know people, colleagues, friends, fellow grad students, etc., whose books are just written all over.
Mine
And
are definitely in there.
and here's the beauty of that. I wish I did it more. I'm learning late in life to say it's okay. However, the beauty of that is it shows you the interactive nature of reading. You don't have to be on a screen to be interactive. You can, put exclamation points next to something. You can say, I don't agree with this at all. You can say, what was he thinking? And it's just reading.
Yeah, we imprint ourselves on the book in the same way as Charlotte Wood's heroine imprinted herself on the nunnery, or
we do.
The characters at sea imprinted themselves on the sea. So you're absolutely right. Books may not be in the best of shape, but they're not going to die. Finally, I have to ask you, Bethanne, I always do at the end of these summaries, a book of the year for you, maybe one that somehow straddles fact and fiction.
The one I would choose from this list would have to be The Director by Daniel Kellman. It is just so varied and various, and it does make more out of Pop's life than there was. And the beauty of that is we can take something that isn't wonderful and we can learn from it in a book. We can take something, and an author's art and creativity can make us see something that we should not learn, because everyone's going to see something different, but we can figure out what we need to learn from it.
Yeah, and the light in, for people watching, the light in your study gives you an expressionist feel. Maybe you're appearing in a Pabst expressionist Weimar film.
Oh my gosh, there we go. But this has been a wonderful discussion.
Well, wonderful to have you. You're always so generous with your time and your immense reading. Bethanne, a happy, healthy new year. And we will talk again in 2026, because whatever one says about the health of the book business, there will be many new books in 2026.
I'm reading them already, I promise. Happy holidays to you too, Andrew.
Step on the